The Crimson Confession of Lord Vaelric Drosmere. I write this not as a man seeks forgiveness, but as something that has long abandoned the need for it. Words are all that remain of my former discipline, and even they feel increasingly ceremonial, like relics placed upon an altar no one visits anymore. Still, I record what I am, because memory is the only thing that has not yet rejected me. My name, as it once was spoken, is irrelevant now. I have borne many over the centuries, though I have grown careless in using them. The one I recall most clearly belonged to the moment I first understood what I had become. Vaelric Drosmere. It is the name I still answer to when I must pass among scholars, collectors, or those who believe themselves perceptive enough to notice anomalies in the world. It began in the Cathedral of Saint Irene, a structure so old that even its foundation seems uncertain in origin. Its spires rise above the city like blackened needles, and its stained glass windows are said to depict saints who no longer correspond to any recognized doctrine. I arrived there during a winter that refused to end, when the sun itself seemed hesitant to rise. I had been summoned under the guise of expertise. A series of unexplained occurrences had been reported within the cathedral. Organ music played without organists, candles burning in empty chapels, and the peculiar absence of dust in certain sealed chambers. They believed I was a historian of ecclesiastical anomalies. In truth, I am something far older than any archive could properly contain. The cathedral welcomed me as it always does those who are already half lost. Its interior is vast beyond reasonable design, as though it was constructed not for worship, but for containment. The nave stretches into shadow so deep that even light appears reluctant to travel its full length. Columns rise like petrified trees, their capitals carved with expressions that shift subtly depending on the angle from which they are observed. I remember the first night I remained within its walls. I did not sleep. I no longer require sleep in the manner of mortals, though I sometimes indulge in its imitation for the sake of appearance. Instead, I walked the corridors, observing the architecture as one might observe a familiar thought returning after centuries of absence. It was then I first encountered the caretaker. He stood near the apse, dressed in garments that suggested neither clergy nor layman, but something suspended between the two. His presence was quiet, deliberate, as though he had been standing there long before the cathedral itself had finished being built. "You are not among the records," he said. Few things surprise me anymore, but his certainty was precise enough to merit attention. "Nor are you," I replied. He inclined his head slightly, as though acknowledging a truth rather than a statement. "Yet I remain," he said. That was when I understood, he was aware of what I am. Not in the superficial sense that mortals often suspect, but in the deeper recognition that comes only from proximity to something that has stopped belonging to the natural order. The caretaker led me beneath the cathedral into chambers that were not marked on any architectural plans. The descent was not measured in steps, but in sensation, as though each level below the surface shed another layer of time. There, in the lowest vault, I saw them. The reliquaries. They were not arranged as relics typically are, with reverence or display. Instead, they were embedded into the walls themselves, as though the cathedral had grown around them rather than been built to house them. Inside each was something preserved. Not saints, not bones alone, fragments of presence, echoes of those who had been consumed not by death, but by continuation. The caretaker observed my reaction carefully. "You recognize them," he said. "I recognize what remains," I replied. He did not ask further questions. That is how I knew he understood more than he was willing to say aloud. It is important that I clarify something here, for those who might mistake my nature for the crude caricatures often repeated in folklore. I do not hunger in the manner described by superstition. Hunger implies urgency, lack, desperation. What I experience is closer to recognition. Blood is not sustenance. It is memory made physical. It carries echoes of identity, fragments of what once was. To consume it is not to feed, but to interpret. I have not done so recklessly in centuries. The cathedral, however, complicates restraint. Over the following nights, I began to notice that the structure responded to my presence, not in movement, but in arrangement. Corridors that had previously ended in stone gradually extended. Doors that had once been sealed appeared ajar. The architecture adapted, as though it were remembering a configuration it had once forgotten. The caretaker observed this with increasing stillness. "You are not its first," he said one evening. I understood immediately what he meant. The cathedral had hosted others like me before. Not many, never many, but enough. Each had left an imprint, not destruction, not alteration in the conventional sense, but architectural memory. The building remembers what enters it. More disturbingly, it remembers what remains. On the 7th night, I entered the upper spire. The ascent was not vertical in any conventional sense. The staircase curved in ways that suggested intention rather than geometry. At times, I passed windows that looked not outward, but inward, revealing sections of the cathedral I had not yet reached. At the summit, I found the chamber of glass. Every surface was lined with stained panels depicting figures that resembled myself. Not identical, but familiar in the unsettling way reflections become when viewed across too many centuries. Some were human, some were not. All were in transition. In the center of the chamber stood a basin of dark stone. It was filled, though not with liquid in the ordinary sense. What lay within shimmered with slow movement, like memory refusing to settle into form. When I approached it, I felt something I had not experienced in a very long time. Recognition that was not intellectual, but instinctive. The caretaker appeared behind me. "This is where you began," he said. I looked into the basin, and I remembered, not the beginning of my existence, but the moment I ceased to belong to it. The transformation was not violent. That is a misconception preserved by those who have never understood continuity. It was gradual, almost scholarly in its precision. A reassignment of thresholds, a recalibration of what constitutes life. I had not been chosen. I had been understood. The cathedral did not create me. It completed me. "You are not bound here," the caretaker said. It was the first time he had offered me what might be interpreted as release. "And yet I remain," I replied. He nodded, as though this outcome had always been expected. "You will continue," he said. It was not a question. I left the chamber, though leaving is perhaps not the correct term. One does not leave something that has already been integrated into perception. Since then, I have observed the cathedral's evolution more closely. It expands in subtle increments, responding not to time, but to presence. It is not a place of worship. It is a place of retention. I have begun to understand that I am not its sole inhabitant in the way one might assume. There are others. Some are caretakers. Some are archives. Some are still becoming. The distinction is not always clear. Occasionally, visitors arrive. Scholars, clergy, those drawn by curiosity or desperation. They enter believing they are investigating architecture. Few understand that architecture is only the surface of what they are entering. Some leave. Most do not. Those who remain are rarely seen again in their original form. I have ceased to intervene. Intervention implies separation, and I am no longer certain such a separation exists. I write this confession not as warning, nor as invitation, but as acknowledgement. There are structures in this world that do not merely contain history. They absorb it. They refine it. They preserve it in forms that resist decay. The Cathedral of Saint Irene is one such structure, and I, Vaelric Drosmere, am one of its more stable expressions. If you should ever find yourself standing beneath its spires, listening to the silence between its stones, understand this: you are not observing it. It is observing what you will become. And if you remain long enough to be noticed in return, then you have already begun the same transformation that once claimed me. Not death, not life, something far more enduring, something that remembers.